The cardboard box felt lighter than it should have. 12 years of work, condensed into a single container that barely filled my backseat. I didn't slam the door on my way out, didn't send a company-wide email, didn't even finish the coffee that had gone cold on my desk, while I watched them move her things into my office. The inbox sat on my phone like a ticking bomb. Vendor emails started flooding in within hours. I watched the numbers climb, 15, 30, 62. Each notification a tiny ping of something I couldn't quite name yet. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd already made my decision. I turned off notifications, every single one. This whole situation started because of one man's ego and his complete misunderstanding of how the systems he'd been managing for 6 months actually worked. Welcome to the Payback Office channel, where we dive deep into stories about workplace karma, professional boundaries, and what happens when people mistake silence for weakness. If these stories resonate with you, stick around. We're building something here. Speaking of building, we're on a journey to 8,000 subscribers, and every single person who hits that button helps us grow this community. If you're interested in more stories about standing your ground in the workplace, the subscribe button is right there. No pressure, just an invitation. My name is Wren Cavanaugh, and until 3 days ago, I was the Senior Operations Manager at Blackwell Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Seattle. I'd worked my way up from an entry-level coordinator position, and I'd never forgotten what it felt like to be overlooked, to have ideas dismissed, to feel invisible. That foundation kept me grounded, kept me connected to every person on my team, regardless of their title. The first day after I walked out, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I slept until 9 in the morning. No alarm, no early meeting prep, no reviewing vendor contracts over my first cup of coffee. When I finally opened my eyes, sunlight was streaming through my bedroom window at an angle I'd forgotten existed on weekdays. My phone sat on the nightstand, face down, exactly where I'd left it. The temptation to flip it over, to check those emails, to see who needed what, it gnawed at me like a persistent itch. But I'd made a promise to myself in that parking lot. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be the one to blink first. The thing about being indispensable is that nobody realizes it until you're gone. And I had been very, very good at my job. Blackwell Associates specialized in supply chain consulting for mid-market retail companies. We helped businesses optimize their vendor relationships, streamline their procurement processes, and negotiate better contracts. It was detailed work, relationship-heavy, and required an intricate understanding of not just logistics, but people. I'd built the vendor management division from the ground up. When I started, we had 12 vendor relationships and processed maybe $2 million in annual contracts. By the time I left, we managed vendor relationships worth $43 million annually across 87 different partnerships. Every single one of those relationships had my fingerprints on it. The director who'd handed my office to his assistant, his name was Philip Thornton, and he'd been with the company for exactly 7 months. He came from a competitor, brought in to modernize operations and increase efficiency, according to the CEO's announcement email. What that really meant was cutting costs and making the numbers look better for the quarterly reports. Philip had arrived with his own ideas about how things should run, most of them lifted from whatever business bestseller he'd read on the plane. He liked phrases like leaning into synergy and optimizing human capital resources. He'd never actually managed vendor relationships himself, but he had plenty of opinions about how I should be doing it. His assistant, the woman who now sat in my office, was named Sienna Hayes. 26 years old, fresh off an MBA from a decent but not exceptional program, and absolutely convinced that her degree made her qualified to run operations she didn't understand. She had ambition, I could respect that, but ambition without competence is just noise. The decision to move her into my office came during a restructuring meeting I wasn't invited to. I found out the same way I found out about most of Philip's decisions, through a calendar invite. Office transition, W. Cavanaugh, scheduled for 2 hours on a Thursday afternoon. When I showed up to my own office that morning, Sienna was already there with a measuring tape, deciding where her desk should go. "Oh, Wren," she'd said, not even having the decency to look embarrassed. Philip didn't tell you? This is going to be so much more efficient. You'll be moving to the shared workspace on the 3rd floor, more collaborative that way. The shared workspace. The open floor plan with no doors, where the junior associates sat in rows of desks like a call center. Where every conversation was public, every phone call overheard, every vendor negotiation exposed to whoever walked by. You can't manage sensitive vendor relationships in a fishbowl, but Philip didn't know that. And Sienna didn't care. I'd nodded, walked to my desk, already half cleared by someone else's hands, and began packing. Sienna kept talking, something about how this was a great opportunity for cross-pollination of ideas, but her words faded into white noise. I was too busy doing math in my head. 87 vendors, 43 million in annual contracts, hundreds of smaller decisions and relationships that kept everything running smoothly, and exactly 0 documentation that anyone else could follow, because I'd been planning to build out that knowledge base next quarter. Philip had cut the budget for it. The box filled slowly. A framed photo of my team from last year's holiday party. The coffee mug my vendors had sent me after we'd successfully navigated a supply crisis during the shipping container shortage. My backup charging cables. The small succulent plant that had somehow survived my care for 3 years. Sienna eventually left, probably to report back to Philip about how well I was taking it. Professional, compliant, quiet. That was always my reputation. Wren doesn't make waves. Wren gets it done. Wren's a team player. What they mistook for compliance was actually calculation. Day 2 started with coffee and silence. I'd driven to a cafe across town, somewhere far from the downtown corridor, where I might run into former colleagues grabbing their morning lattes. The barista didn't know my order, didn't know my name. The anonymity felt like cool water after years in a desert. My phone sat on the table next to my laptop. I'd finally looked at it this morning, just to see the damage. The email count had climbed to 147. The texts were worse. 17 from my former team members, 6 from vendors, 3 from Philip himself. I opened none of them. Instead, I opened my personal laptop and started doing something I should have done years ago. I began documenting exactly what I'd built. The vendor relationships weren't just contracts and email chains. They were built on years of personal rapport, of understanding each company's internal politics, of knowing who the real decision-makers were behind the titles on the org chart. I knew which account manager at our largest supplier was going through a divorce and needed flexible meeting times. I knew which vendor principal was touchy about contract terminology after a bad lawsuit 3 years back. I knew who could expedite an order if we really needed it, and who needed a month's notice for anything outside standard parameters. This wasn't information that lived in our CRM system. It lived in my head, in my notes, in the relationships I'd cultivated through hundreds of phone calls and dozens of in-person visits. And now it was living in a private document on my personal laptop, time-stamped and detailed. Not because I planned to use it, just because I wanted a record of what I'd built before someone else tried to take credit for it, or before it all fell apart. The cafe was filling up with the late morning crowd, freelancers with their MacBooks, retirees reading newspapers, a young mother negotiating snack time with a determined toddler, normal people doing normal things, unbothered by vendor contracts and corporate restructuring, and the particular humiliation of being demoted without cause. My phone buzzed, a call this time, not a text. Philip's name appeared on the screen. I watched it ring through to voicemail, took a sip of coffee, watched a notification pop up, new voicemail. The temptation to listen was stronger this time. What could he possibly have to say? An apology? An explanation? A demand that I return and fix whatever was currently breaking? I deleted the voicemail without listening. Added Philip's number to a special filter I'd created. Emails and calls would technically come through, but I'd never see the notifications. As far as I was concerned, he no longer existed. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time, the name made me pause. Holly Brennan. Holly was one of my team leads, a sharp woman in her early 30s who'd been with Blackwell for 5 years. She'd grown from a junior coordinator to managing her own subset of vendor relationships, and I'd been mentoring her toward an eventual promotion. If anyone from the company deserved a response, it was Holly. I answered. Wren, thank God. Holly's voice carried a tension I'd rarely heard from her. I know you're probably not supposed to talk to us or something, but it's chaos here. Complete chaos. What's going on? Sienna locked herself out of the vendor management system. She apparently changed the master password yesterday because she wanted to establish new security protocols, and then she wrote it down wrong. It has been trying to reset it all morning, but the backup authentication goes to your email. Your company email, which apparently you're not checking. I wasn't checking it because I'd set up an auto-forward to my personal email before I left, but that only covered incoming messages, not system authentication requests. A small oversight on my part. Or maybe not an oversight at all. It can override it, I said calmly. They have admin access. That's what we thought, but apparently you set up some kind of special security protocol last year after that data breach attempt. The IT director is saying they need your authorization, or they have to go through a 48-hour security review process before they can force a reset. I had set that up. After someone tried to fish their way into our vendor database with spoofed emails, I'd worked with it to implement a multi-layer security system that required senior manager approval for any administrative overrides. It had seemed like a good idea at the time. I can't help with that, Holly. I don't work there anymore. You weren't fired, though, right? Philip said you were transitioning to a new role. Philip can characterize it however he wants. I packed my things and left. I'm not coming back. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, we have vendor calls scheduled this afternoon, major renewals. Sienna was supposed to prep for them, but she can't access any of the account histories or contract notes. She's been asking us for information, but honestly, Wren, most of us don't know the details on the high-level accounts. That was always your territory. Then I suggest Sienna figure it out. She has my office now. She has my title. She clearly doesn't need my help. Wren. Holly, I care about you. I care about the team, but this isn't my problem anymore. Philip made that clear when he had my office cleared out without a conversation. If he wants my help now, he can ask me himself. He's called you 4 times today. I know. Another pause. Holly was smart enough to read between the lines. Okay, I get it. For what it's worth, this is complete garbage. You built everything we have, and they're treating you like you're replaceable. Everyone's replaceable, Holly. The question is how long it takes for the replacement to figure out what they're doing. We said goodbye, and I ended the call feeling a complicated knot of emotions. Satisfaction that my absence was already causing problems. Guilt that my former team was caught in the middle. And a growing curiosity about just how bad things would get before Philip admitted he'd made a mistake. By day 3, the email count hit 214. Every single one marked urgent, the digital equivalent of someone screaming into a void. I'd spent the morning at a local park, walking the trails with my phone on silent in my pocket. The weather was cooperating, one of those rare Seattle mornings where the sky was actually blue and the air smelled like pine instead of rain. Runners passed by with their earbuds in. Dog walkers nodded in greeting. Nobody knew my name or my job title or the small act of rebellion I was currently engaged in. When I finally sat down on a bench overlooking the water, I allowed myself to open the email app. Not to respond, just to observe. The subject lines told the story. Urgent, vendor call today, need background. Contract renewal, immediate response needed. Ray, Watson Industries escalated. Where are the Q3 vendor reports? Sienna Hayes needs assistance priority. And my personal favorite, from Philip himself, professional courtesy response required. Professional courtesy. The phrase sat in my chest like a stone. Where was the professional courtesy when he moved me to a shared workspace without discussion? Where was the professional courtesy when he promoted his assistant into my role without even pretending to consider my qualifications? I scrolled further. The vendors had started reaching out directly, confused about why their usual contact person wasn't responding. These messages carried a different tone, concerned rather than demanding, personal rather than corporate. Hey Wren, haven't heard from you in a few days. Hope everything's okay. Can we reschedule our quarterly review call? Wren got an email from someone named Sienna about our contract renewal, but she's asking for information we already provided to you last month. What's going on? This isn't like you to go silent. Is there a better email to reach you at? These messages made me feel something the others didn't. These were relationships I'd built, partnerships I valued. But they were also partnerships with Blackwell and Associates, not with me personally. If I responded now, I'd be doing Philip's job for him. I'd be proving that he could push me aside and still benefit from my work. A text message interrupted my scrolling. Unknown number. Wren, it's Jolene from Watson Industries. Your company has been trying to reach you through us somehow. Very confused about what's happening with our account. Can you call me when you get a chance? Jolene Park, Director of Operations at Watson Industries, our third largest vendor relationship. $12 million annual contract, up for renewal in 6 weeks. I'd been working with Jolene for 8 years, since before she got her director title. Back when she was a senior buyer who appreciated that I actually listened to her supply chain concerns instead of just pushing our agenda. I started typing a response, then stopped, then started again. Hi Jolene, I've actually transitioned out of my role at Blackwell. Sienna Hayes is your new point of contact. I'm sure she'll get up to speed quickly. The reply came back in under a minute. Transitioned or pushed out? Because this Sienna person doesn't seem to know anything about our partnership history. She asked me to send over our company information and requirements like we're a new vendor. I could picture Jolene's face as she typed that, the particular expression she got when someone wasted her time with incompetence. I'd seen it directed at other sales reps over the years, but never at me. We had a mutual respect, built on years of actually delivering what we promised. Politics above my pay grade. But you might want to loop in their director, Philip Thornton, if you're not getting what you need from Sienna. Already did. He assured me Sienna is fully capable of managing our strategic partnership. His words, not mine. Then I guess you're in good hands. Wren, off the record, what the hell is happening over there? I stared at the question for a long moment. Off the record didn't really exist in business relationships, not really. Anything I said could get back to Philip, could be used to paint me as unprofessional, could damage the reputation I'd spent 12 years building. But I was also tired of protecting people who hadn't protected me. Off the record, new director came in, decided to restructure without understanding what he was restructuring. Gave my role to someone with no vendor management experience because she has an MBA and tells him what he wants to hear. I was offered a demotion to a desk in the shared workspace. I declined. By declined, you mean quit. By declined, I mean I packed my things and stopped showing up. Semantics. Good for you, seriously. I've seen how hard you work, and if they can't appreciate that, they don't deserve you. The message sat on my screen like validation I didn't know I needed. Jolene and I weren't friends exactly. Our relationship had always been professional. But there was something solid about having someone who'd worked with me for years acknowledge that this situation was wrong. I appreciate that. And Jolene, if you're not getting what you need from Sienna or Philip, you have every right to escalate to their CEO or consider other options. Your business is worth more than their organizational drama. Trust me, I'm already exploring other options. Our renewal isn't mandatory. If Blackwell can't maintain the relationship standards you set, we'll find someone who can. That message should have concerned me. Watson Industries was a major account. Losing them would be a significant hit to the company's revenue, to the team's commission structure, to the metrics Philip was supposed to be optimizing. But instead, I felt a calm settle over me. This was the natural consequence of treating people as expendable, not revenge, just reality. The coffee shop near my apartment had become my unofficial office. The owner, a woman in her 50s named Margaret, had started recognizing me by day 4. She didn't ask why I was suddenly there every morning instead of rushing past in business clothes like the other downtown commuters. She just made my coffee and let me occupy my corner table for hours at a time. My laptop was open to a spreadsheet I'd created, a private archive of every vendor relationship, complete with contact histories, negotiation notes, personal details that mattered for maintaining partnerships, and upcoming renewal dates. It wasn't corporate espionage. It was my own professional history, documented for my own records. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The truth was more complicated. Every entry I added to the spreadsheet felt like insurance against being erased. Philip could give away my office, my title, my desk, but he couldn't take what I knew. He couldn't take the years of relationship building, the institutional knowledge, the understanding of how all these pieces fit together. My phone had become a source of entertainment rather than stress. The emails continued to pile up. I'd stopped counting at 250, and the messages had evolved from urgent to desperate to occasionally threatening. Philip's latest email, which I'd skimmed purely for amusement, carried the subject line, "Final request for professional transition assistance." The body of the email was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. He acknowledged the organizational changes, not demotion, never demotion, and expressed appreciation for my many contributions, past tense, naturally. Then came the ask. Would I be willing to come in for a paid consultation to help Sienna get up to speed on the vendor relationships? Paid consultation. As if 12 years of relationship building could be downloaded in a few hours of handholding. As if I hadn't already offered to document processes and train a successor, proposals that Philip had rejected as unnecessary overhead. I didn't respond to that email either. What I did do was reach out to a few contacts I'd been meaning to call for years, people at other firms, recruiters who'd tried to poach me before, former colleagues who'd moved on to director and VP positions at companies that might value what I brought to the table. I wasn't desperate for work. I had savings, and I'd already received 2 calls from recruiters who'd somehow heard I was exploring new opportunities. The consulting world was small, and word traveled fast. But I was curious about what else was out there, what I might be worth to someone who actually understood vendor relationship management, what my career could look like if I wasn't constantly fighting to prove my value to people who'd already decided I was replaceable. One of those calls came from a woman named Stephanie Joe, a VP at Harriman Consulting. Harriman was Blackwell's biggest competitor, larger, more prestigious, with a client roster that included several Fortune 500 companies. "Wren Cavanaugh," Stephanie said when I answered, her voice warm with recognition. "I heard through the grapevine that you might be available for new opportunities. Please tell me it's true." "Depends on the opportunity. We've been trying to expand our vendor management division for 2 years. We have the clients, we have the demand, but we don't have someone with your expertise to build out the infrastructure. I've watched your work from a distance. The Watson Industries partnership alone is textbook relationship management." "That's Blackwell's partnership, not mine." "For now, maybe. But partnerships are built on relationships, and relationships follow people, not companies. If you were to join Harriman, I suspect several of your former vendors might be interested in exploring what we could offer them." It was a careful dance, this conversation. Neither of us could explicitly discuss poaching clients that crossed legal and ethical lines, but we both understood the reality. Vendors worked with companies, but they trusted people. If I moved to a competitor, some of those relationships would follow, especially if they were unhappy with the service they were receiving at Blackwell. "I'd need to think about it," I said. "And I'd need to understand the role, the compensation, the authority. I'd have to build things the right way." "Of course, why don't you come in next week? No pressure, just a conversation. Meet the team, see the office, let us show you what we're building." We scheduled the meeting for the following Tuesday. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone, processing what had just shifted. This wasn't just about leaving Blackwell anymore. This was about potentially taking everything I'd built and giving it to their biggest competitor. The ethical implications sat heavy in my mind. I'd signed a non-compete agreement when I joined Blackwell, but it was narrowly written. I couldn't directly solicit clients for 1 year after leaving. But vendors reaching out to me, choosing to follow me to a new company, That was their decision, not my solicitation. And if Blackwell couldn't maintain those relationships without me, that wasn't my failure. That was theirs. A week after I walked out of Blackwell Associates, the phone call I'd been half expecting finally came. Not from Philip this time, from someone higher up the chain. Arthur Blackwell, founder and CEO. The man whose name was on the building and who I'd maybe spoken to directly 3 times in 12 years. I stared at his name on my caller ID for 3 rings before answering. Miss Cavanaugh? His voice carried the kind of authority that came from 40 years of running a successful company. I apologize for the direct call. I was hoping we could have a conversation. About what, Mr. Blackwell? About the current situation with our vendor management division. I've been reviewing some concerning developments, and your name keeps coming up. I'm sure it does. I built that division. Yes, you did, which is why I'm troubled by the circumstances of your departure. Philip's account of events and what I'm hearing from our vendors don't align. I waited, let him fill the silence. Jolene Park at Watson Industries called me personally yesterday. She's worked with us for 8 years, and I've never received a call from her before. She wanted to know if we were planning to maintain our service standards or if she should start taking meetings with other consultants. That's her prerogative. It is, but when a $12 million account starts questioning our commitment, I pay attention. And when I dig into why she's questioning us, I find that her primary contact for 8 years was abruptly replaced with someone who apparently asked her to resubmit basic vendor information we've had on file since 2018. Sienna's new to the role. I'm sure she's doing her best. Wren, may I call you Wren? He didn't wait for permission. I'm not calling to defend Philip's decisions. I'm calling because I've spent the last 3 days understanding just how much damage those decisions have caused. We have vendor calls going unanswered. Contracts coming up for renewal with no preparation. Account managers at our partner companies asking if we're undergoing some kind of crisis. And at the center of all of it is the absence of the person who held these relationships together. Then I suggest you bring that person back. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'd like you to return to Blackwell. Your office, your title, your team. And I'd like to discuss a significant compensation increase and a promotion to Vice President of Vendor Relations. There it was, the offer I'd been waiting for, delivered exactly as I'd predicted it would be. Not from Philip, who'd created this mess, but from Arthur, who understood the cost of it. A week ago, I might have said yes immediately. Validation, restoration, recognition, everything I deserved and hadn't received. But a week was a long time. A week was long enough to realize that the problem wasn't just Philip. It was a system that allowed someone like Philip to make these decisions in the first place. That valued his fresh perspective over my 12 years of proven results. That assumed I'd be quietly grateful to get my job back instead of angry that I'd lost it at all. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Blackwell, but I need to know, is Philip still the director of operations? A pause, yes, though his role is being reevaluated. Reevaluated, not terminated, not demoted, reevaluated. These things take time, Wren. HR processes, documentation. I understand. And I understand that you're in a difficult position. But here's my difficult position. I spent 12 years building something valuable, and it took Philip 7 months to decide I was expendable. I packed my office in silence because I was professional enough not to make a scene. And now that the consequences of his decision are showing up in your quarterly projections, you'd like me to come back and fix it. When you put it that way. How else should I put it? Silence on the other end. Then, with a sigh, you're right, this was handled badly. Philip made a significant error in judgment and you paid the price for it. I'm trying to make that right. By offering me a promotion that I should have had years ago, under a director who's proven he doesn't value my work, in a company that allowed this to happen in the first place. What would make this right, Wren? Tell me what you need. It was a fair question, and I had an answer ready. I have a meeting with Harriman Consulting next week. They've offered me a VP position building out their vendor management division from scratch. Full authority, significant equity stake, and a team that I'd hire and train myself. Before I turn that down, I need to know that coming back to Blackwell means something more than just putting out fires and hoping the same thing doesn't happen again in 6 months. You're asking for Philip's job. I'm asking for the organizational authority to do my job without someone undermining it because they have a different vision or a favorite assistant to promote. Whether that means reporting directly to you or restructuring the operations division, or yes, replacing Philip, that's for you to decide. But I won't come back just to be marginalized again. The silence stretched longer this time. I could almost hear Arthur's mental calculations, the cost of losing me permanently versus the political complexity of removing a director he'd hired 7 months ago. The optics of promoting from within versus admitting he'd made a mistake. "Give me 48 hours, he finally said. "Don't make any commitments to Harriman before we talk again. I need time to work through some organizational issues." "Mr. Blackwell, with respect, I've given Blackwell 12 years. I can give you 48 hours, but after that, I'm making decisions based on what's best for my career, not what's most convenient for the company." "Understood, and Wren, for what it's worth, you were right to walk out. Philip never should have put you in that position. I'm sorry it took a crisis for me to see that." The apology landed softer than I expected. Not enough to erase the past week, but enough to acknowledge it. We ended the call, and I sat in my apartment feeling the weight of a decision I hadn't fully anticipated having to make. A week ago, getting my job back would have been victory enough. Now, I had options. Leverage. The understanding that my value wasn't tied to one company's recognition of it. My phone buzzed with a text from Holly. "Whatever you said to Mr. Blackwell has the entire executive floor in emergency meetings. Philip looks like he's going to be sick. Please tell me you're coming back." I didn't respond, not because I didn't care about Holly or the team, but because this decision wasn't about them anymore. It was about what I was worth and who was willing to recognize it. The Harriman Consulting offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, with views of the Sound that made Blackwell's building look dated and small. Stephanie Joe met me in the lobby herself, bypassing the usual recruiter escort routine. "Wren, thank you for coming in." Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. "I have to admit, when I heard Arthur Blackwell personally called you, I thought we might lose you before you even saw our offices." Word travels fast. In our world, always, but I'm glad you kept this appointment. I think you'll find what we're building here is worth considering, regardless of what Blackwell offers. The tour was impressive. Not just the physical space, though the private offices, the modern conference rooms, and the employee amenities were notable, but the structure. Stephanie introduced me to the VP of Client Relations, the Director of Strategic Partnerships, the head of their analytics division. Each person she introduced had a clear domain of authority, and more importantly, they talked about their work with the kind of autonomy I'd been fighting for at Blackwell. "We don't have layers of approval for the sake of hierarchy," Stephanie explained as we settled into her office. "If you build the vendor management division, it's yours. You hire your team, you set the processes, you determine the strategy. I'm here for support and resources, not to micromanage." "What about non-competes, client conflicts?" "We've reviewed your agreement with Blackwell. It's enforceable for direct solicitation, but it doesn't prevent you from doing vendor management work generally. And if former Blackwell vendors decide they want to work with Harriman because they trust you, that's their business decision. We won't solicit them, but we won't turn them away either." That's a fine line legally. It is, which is why we're careful. But Wren, let's be honest about what's happening. Blackwell is struggling because they lost their institutional knowledge when they pushed you out. Some of those vendors are going to leave regardless of what you do. The question is whether they leave to work with us, where you can ensure they get excellent service, or whether they scatter to various competitors and you have no influence over their experience. It was a compelling argument, and one I'd been wrestling with myself. I had no legal or ethical obligation to protect Blackwell from the consequences of their decisions, but I did feel some responsibility to the vendors I'd worked with, to ensure they landed somewhere that would treat them right. "Let's talk compensation," I said. Stephanie smiled. She'd clearly been waiting for this. Base salary of $220,000, which I understand is approximately 40% higher than your Blackwell compensation. Performance bonuses structured around successful vendor partnerships and division growth. And this is the part I think will interest you most, a 2% equity stake in the company, vesting over 4 years. Equity, ownership. A stake in building something that couldn't be taken away by a director's whim or a corporate restructuring. The equity is contingent on building out the vendor management division to specific benchmarks, Stephanie continued. 20 vendor relationships in year 1, 50 in year 2, with minimum contract values we'd outline. It's ambitious, but based on what you've built at Blackwell, I think it's achievable. What's the timeline? When would you need an answer? We'd like to move quickly. Our Q4 strategy is being finalized next week, and having you on board would significantly impact what we can promise clients. So ideally, within the week. I nodded. I have a call scheduled with Arthur Blackwell tomorrow. After that conversation, I'll have a better sense of my options. Of course, and Wren, whatever you decide, I want you to know that this offer is about what you can build going forward, not just about what you're walking away from. You've proven you can create value. We're offering you the platform and freedom to do it at scale. We shook hands again, and I left Harriman's offices with a folder full of information and a head full of calculations. The Harriman offer was objectively better in almost every measurable way. More money, more authority, equity stake, modern infrastructure, and a leadership team that seemed to value expertise over politics. But Blackwell was known, comfortable, and there was something to be said for fixing what I'd built rather than starting over. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A message from Arthur. Can we move our call to this evening? Some developments I'd like to discuss sooner rather than later. I confirmed and spent the rest of the afternoon walking along the waterfront, thinking about what I actually wanted beyond the validation of being courted by both companies. The truth was, I wanted to work somewhere that respected what I brought to the table, where my experience wasn't dismissed by someone's MBA and ambition, where I could build systems and relationships without constantly defending their value to people who didn't understand them. The question was whether Blackwell could become that place, or whether it had already shown me exactly what it was. Arthur's call came at exactly 6 p.m. I answered from my balcony, watching the Seattle skyline light up against the evening sky. Wren, thank you for your flexibility with timing. He sounded tired in a way he hadn't during our first call. I've spent the last 48 hours in conversations I should have had 7 months ago, and I owe you an update. I'm listening. Philip Thornton will be leaving Blackwell and Associates. We're characterizing it as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities, effective at the end of this month. His restructuring initiatives are being reviewed, and several of them are being reversed. I waited for the relief or satisfaction to hit. Instead, I just felt tired. Sienna will be transitioned back to an assistant role, this time supporting the client relations team where her skills are better suited. Your former team will report directly to you, assuming you come back, and you'll report directly to me as VP of Vendor Relations and Operations. Operations too. You've been doing half that job anyway, without the title or compensation. It's time we acknowledged that. The offer is $200,000 base, plus performance bonuses tied to vendor retention and contract growth, full hiring authority for your team, and a seat in our executive leadership meetings. It was a strong offer. Not quite Harriman's numbers, but competitive. And the reporting structure was what I'd asked for, direct access to Arthur, no Philip-like obstacle between me and the authority I needed. What about the office situation? You get your office back, with an apology from me personally for how that was handled. And what happens the next time someone comes in with big ideas about restructuring? What's to prevent this from happening again? Honestly, nothing is guaranteed, Wren. I can't promise that every decision made at this company will be perfect or that you'll never face organizational challenges. What I can promise is that I understand the cost of not listening to the people who actually do the work. Philip was a mistake, my mistake. I brought him in because I thought we needed outside perspective, and I didn't pay enough attention to what that perspective was costing us. It was the most honest thing he'd said. No corporate doublespeak, no defensive posturing, just acknowledgement that he'd made an error and was trying to correct it. I have an offer from Harriman Consulting, I said. It's higher compensation, equity stake, and the opportunity to build something from scratch. I know, Stephanie Joe is excellent at recruiting, and I don't blame you for considering it. If I were in your position, I'd be tempted too. So why should I stay at Blackwell? Because you've already built something here. You know the systems, the people, the clients. You have institutional knowledge and relationships that took 12 years to develop. At Harriman, you'd be starting over. It might be exciting, but it's also risky. Here, you're coming back to something that already works, that you made work, with the authority to protect it. That cuts both ways, Mr. Blackwell. I know the systems here, which means I also know the limitations. I know how decisions get made and where the politics get messy. At Harriman, I'd have a clean slate. Fair point. Let me offer you something else then. Come back to Blackwell for 1 year. Take the VP role, rebuild what needs rebuilding, stabilize the vendor relationships. If at the end of that year, you're not satisfied with how things are working, I will personally provide a reference for whatever opportunity you pursue next. No non-compete enforcement, no hard feelings. But give us 1 year to prove we can do better. It was a clever offer. A year was long enough to make a real impact, but short enough that it didn't feel like a permanent commitment. And the promise of no non-compete enforcement removed one of the biggest risks of returning, that I'd be locked in even if things didn't improve. I need to think about it, I said, and I need 24 hours to do that thinking without any more calls or offers or pressure. You have it. Call me Friday morning with your decision, whatever it is. We ended the call, and I sat in the growing darkness, weighing futures I couldn't quite envision yet. Both offers were good. Both represented recognition of my value, which was what I'd wanted all along. But there was something else nagging at me, something beyond compensation and titles and equity stakes. The question of who I wanted to be in this story. The person who returned and fixed what was broken, or the person who walked away and built something new. My phone buzzed one more time. A message from Holly. I don't know what's happening in the executive suite, but thank you. Whatever you did, it's making a difference. And that somehow tipped the scale. Friday morning arrived with rain, which felt appropriate for a decision this heavy. I'd spent the previous day offline completely, phone on airplane mode, laptop closed, no emails or calls or outside input. Just me, a notebook, and a long list of pros and cons that eventually stopped being about money or titles, and started being about something harder to quantify. At 9 a.m., I called Arthur Blackwell. Wren, he answered on the first ring, I hope you have good news for me. I'm coming back to Blackwell, but I have conditions beyond what we've already discussed. I'm listening. I want to rebuild the vendor management division properly this time. That means budget for training, documentation, and succession planning. I won't be the single point of failure again. If something happens to me, if I get hit by a bus or decide to leave in 3 years, the relationships and processes should survive. Agreed, that's just good business. I want quarterly reviews with you directly, not filtered through whatever director you hire next. If there are organizational changes that affect my division, I'm in the room when those decisions are made. Done. And I want a written commitment that the non-compete clause is void after 1 year if I choose to leave. I'm not walking back into a situation where I could be trapped. A pause. That one is trickier legally, but I can work with our counsel to structure it as a modified agreement. You'll have it in writing before you sign anything. Then I'll see you Monday morning. My office, my team, and we start by doing damage control on every vendor relationship that's been neglected for the past 2 weeks. Wren, his voice carried something that might have been relief. Thank you. I know this wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't, but I'm not coming back to save you from a bad quarter, Mr. Blackwell. I'm coming back because I believe in what I built, and I'm not ready to walk away from it yet. Don't make me regret this. I won't, you have my word. We finalized a few more details, and I ended the call feeling something settle in my chest. Not quite peace, but certainty. I'd made my choice, and now I'd see if it was the right one. The second call was harder. Stephanie Jo answered with enthusiasm that I was about to disappoint. "Wren, I was hoping to hear from you. Have you made a decision?" "I have. I'm grateful for the offer from Harriman, truly. It's an incredible opportunity, and I was genuinely tempted. But I've decided to return to Blackwell." Silence for a beat, then, "Can I ask what changed their offer?" "VP of Vendor Relations and Operations, direct report to the CEO, full authority to rebuild the division, and some personal assurances about organizational stability." That's a strong counteroffer. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed, but I respect the decision. And Wren, if things don't work out, or if you find yourself looking for something different in a year or two, this conversation isn't over. We'd still love to work with you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you taking the time to show me what else is possible. Even if I'm not joining Harriman, this process reminded me what I'm worth. That's the most important thing. Good luck, Wren, I mean that. We said goodbye, and I sat with my phone in my hand, feeling the weight of bridges both crossed and kept intact. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. I updated my resume, not because I needed it now, but because documenting the past 2 weeks felt important. Rebuilt vendor relationships, negotiated competing offers, secured VP promotion and organizational authority. It looked good on paper, but the real test would be whether I could actually make it work. Monday morning, I walked into Blackwell Associates at 7:30 a.m., dressed in my best suit and carrying confidence I'd earned the hard way. The lobby receptionist did a double take when she saw me. "Miss Cavanaugh, we heard you were coming back. Welcome home." Home? It didn't quite feel like home yet, but maybe it would again. My office was exactly as I'd left it, except cleaner. Someone had removed all traces of Sienna's brief occupation and restocked my supplies. The coffee mug from my vendors sat on the desk, the succulent plant back in its spot by the window. Even the photo from last year's holiday party was back on the shelf. Holly appeared in the doorway at 8 a.m. sharp, holding 2 coffees. "I figured you might need this." She handed me one, her smile tentative. "Is it weird that I want to hug you right now? Because I know we're professionals, but also this past week was a nightmare." "Hug it out," I said, and she did. "So what happens now?" she asked when we separated. "I heard Philip's gone and you're reporting to Mr. Blackwell directly." "That's right. And what happens now is we fix everything that broke while I was gone, we implement proper documentation and training systems, and we make sure this division is stronger than it was before. No pressure or anything. Holly, I just negotiated my way from unemployment to VP in 2 weeks. Pressure is kind of my thing now." She laughed, and it felt like the first normal moment I'd had since I packed that cardboard box. The first week back was intense. I spent hours on calls with vendors, personally apologizing for the disruption and reassuring them that their relationships with Blackwell were intact. Most were understanding. A few were skeptical. 2 had already signed with competitors, losses I had to accept as the cost of Philip's mistakes. Jeline Park at Watson Industries took my call with audible relief. "Wren, thank God. I was starting to think I'd have to completely restructure our supply chain partnerships." "I'm sorry for the chaos, Jeline. That wasn't fair to you." "Fair to me? Wren, I was worried about you. Going radio silent isn't your style, and when we couldn't get straight answers from anyone at Blackwell, I thought something serious had happened." "Something did happen, but it's resolved now, and I'm back with the authority to make sure it doesn't happen again." VP of Operations, I heard, well-deserved, and long overdue if I'm being honest. We spent an hour going over the Watson Industries renewal, and by the end of the call, the contract was not only renewed, but expanded. Jeline had been considering adding services she'd previously sourced elsewhere, and my return gave her confidence to consolidate more business with Blackwell. That conversation set the pattern for the next several weeks. Vendor by vendor, relationship by relationship, I rebuilt what had been damaged and strengthened what remained. And this time, I documented everything. Every conversation, every negotiation point, every personal detail that made these partnerships work. I hired 2 new team members, both with vendor management experience, and I trained them personally. Not just on the processes, but on the philosophy, that these relationships were built on trust and consistency, not just contracts and quarterly reviews. Holly stepped up to manage more accounts independently, with my mentorship but not my constant oversight. She was ready for it, and watching her confidence grow was one of the unexpected rewards of coming back. 3 months into my return, Arthur called me into his office for our first quarterly review. "The numbers are impressive," he said, pulling up a dashboard on his monitor. "Vendor retention is up 23% from this time last year. Contract renewals are ahead of schedule, and we've added 8 new vendor relationships, all of which came through referrals from existing partners." That's what happens when you invest in relationships instead of treating them as transactions. "I'm learning that, and Wren, I want you to know that he gestured at the screen, "this is exactly what I'd hoped for when I asked you to come back. You've not only stabilized the division, you've elevated it." "We're not done yet. I want to expand the team by 2 more people next quarter, and I need budget approval for a CRM upgrade. The system we're using is outdated, and it's limiting our ability to scale. Send me the proposal. If the numbers make sense, you have my support." It was that simple. No fighting for resources, no justifying basic needs. Just respect for my expertise and trust in my judgment. Walking out of Arthur's office that day, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just back at Blackwell. I was building something new within it, something that reflected the lessons I'd learned from being pushed out and choosing to return. The anger I'd carried for those first few weeks had transformed into something more productive. Determination to ensure that what I built couldn't be casually dismantled by someone's ego or ignorance. 6 months after I returned, I ran into Sienna at a coffee shop downtown. She was with someone I didn't recognize, dressed in business casual and looking nothing like the confident assistant who'd measured my office with a tape measure. Our eyes met, and for a moment I thought she might pretend not to see me, but she walked over. "Wren, hi." Her voice was smaller than I remembered. "I heard you're doing really well at Blackwell, VP of Operations. That's amazing." "Thank you. How are you doing?" "I'm good. I'm actually at a startup now doing operations coordination. It's small, but it's a good fit." She paused. "I owe you an apology for how everything went down with your office with the transition. I was in over my head, and instead of admitting it, I just pushed forward. It wasn't fair to you." The apology landed unexpectedly sincere. I could have brushed it off, could have stayed professional and distant. But I remembered what it felt like to be young and ambitious, and to make mistakes that taught you more than success ever did. "I appreciate that, Sienna, and for what it's worth, I hope the startup works out. We all deserve to find roles where our skills are actually valued." "Thanks, and Wren, for what it's worth, watching how you handled everything, walking out, negotiating your return, coming back stronger. It taught me more about professional boundaries than my entire MBA program did." We parted ways cordially, and I realized I'd let go of something I'd been carrying without realizing it. The resentment, the anger at being replaced by someone unqualified. She'd been a piece in someone else's bad decision, not the architect of it. The real lesson wasn't about Sienna or even Philip. It was about understanding my value clearly enough to walk away from situations that didn't honor it, and confident enough to return on terms that did. A year after I walked out of Blackwell and Associates with a single cardboard box, I sat in my office. The same office, but fundamentally different, reviewing the annual vendor relationship report. 93 vendor partnerships, 52 million in annual contracts, 0 account losses to competitor poaching, and a team of 6 people I'd personally trained and mentored, each one capable of managing these relationships if I decided to walk away again. But I hadn't decided to walk away. I'd decided to stay and build something that would outlast any single person's tenure, including my own. The documentation system was complete. The training protocols were established. The succession planning was in place. If I left tomorrow, the division would survive. And that, more than any title or salary increase, felt like victory. Arthur stopped by my office that afternoon, a rare occurrence that usually meant something significant. "Wren, do you have a minute?" "Of course." He settled into the chair across from my desk, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. "I wanted to tell you personally before the announcement goes out. We're creating a new C-suite position, Chief Operations Officer, and I'd like you to consider it." I set down my pen slowly. "That's a significant jump." "It is, but you've proven you can build and manage complex systems. You understand both the strategic and tactical elements of operations, and most importantly, you've earned the trust of our vendor partners and our team. You're ready for this." "What's the timeline?" "We'd want to make the transition in Cone next year. That gives you time to promote someone into your current VP role, Holly, if you think she's ready, and to think about whether this is the direction you want your career to go." I didn't have to think long. A year ago, I'd been packing my desk in silence, wondering if I'd just ended my career. Now, I was being offered a C-suite position at the company that had tried to demote me. "I'm interested, let's talk details." We spent the next hour discussing the scope, the responsibilities, the compensation. And when Arthur left my office, I sat alone with the realization that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something so valuable that trying to replace you becomes the lesson everyone else learns. If you've made it this far, thank you for being part of this journey. Stories like these remind us that our value isn't determined by who recognizes it, but by what we build and how we show up for ourselves when everything falls apart. If this resonated with you, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe. We're working toward 8,000 subscribers, and every person who joins this community helps us share more stories about standing your ground, knowing your worth, and turning professional setbacks into stepping stones. The subscribe button is right there whenever you're ready. Until next time, remember, the people who underestimate you are giving you the freedom to prove them wrong on your own terms.